So my name is Jenn. I am still a qualified midwife, although a non-practicing midwife, and I have been doing that for the last 10 years. And I've lived in and out of Cornwall for the last 25 years, maybe a little bit longer actually. I was given notice about a month ago, no, maybe just less, but notice to leave the rented property that I'm in at the moment. And the reason being complications of COVID, really, for a family situation whereby they need the space that I'm in at the moment. Initially, I think they were following the 6A statutory notice period, which is 4 months. So that will bring me up to Christmas.
And are you in a position where you can move somewhere else?
No. So at the moment it's difficult. I have rented for a long time, forever. And I'm quite good at finding homes and places to live generally. This year, due to my health, I have a chronic pain condition called rheumatoid arthritis. I had to reduce my work drastically. My capacity to work has reduced because of my immune system and the symptoms that I have. And that has had a direct knock-on effect to my housing situation over the last few years, actually. By being outpriced from my previous area, which was Falmouth and Penryn, as my hours have reduced, my ability to pay or keep up with rent demands has reduced. And actually rent has sort of went over my capacity even when I was working full time. But at the moment I'm not working, so my options are drastically reduced. I'm hoping that social housing will be able to help me, and that process is quite complicated and entrenched and stuck at the moment because there's so many people in a crisis situation like me. But even if I wanted to rent privately, and I look periodically, sort of every week, I sort of look at all of my options, there is very little available. In fact, there's pretty much nothing available, either in this area or county-wide at the moment. My needs have been reassessed this year because of my health and the symptoms that I'm having. My needs have changed. So it's, in essence, they've increased. So I have majoritively been in touch with the council, their housing department, their welfare team department, which is the kind of crisis section of their housing department. And, well, today, their homelessness and crisis prevention team. And those three sections seem to be very fragmented, and they have quite a lot of difficulty talking to themselves. So often, well, this week specifically, I've had to sort of repeat all the information to each different section of that housing umbrella in the council. Other than that, there isn't really a lot of support. And to be honest, I mean, I contacted these same departments 5 years ago because I knew I was going to be outpriced from the Falmouth area. So I rang them. I was actually employed at that point. And one of the bits of advice that they gave me was, and this is the housing department specific to Cornwall Council, was had I considered giving up my job so that I could be prioritised. And at the time, I was a family nurse. I was part of the Family Nurse Partnership, which is a gold standard, long-term health supporting programme, which is international. In fact, the Duchess of Cambridge went to see the Family Nurse Partnership in London recently to highlight the great work that they do. And at that time, when I was looking for somewhere to live, after being sort of newly diagnosed and really struggling. I was living in a caravan at the time. So I contacted this same team, and they said, had I considered giving up work so that I could be prioritised in terms of banding. And that was my only protective factor at the time, was my work. I had really good colleagues. It was my identity, it was my income. And I was asked if I would give that up in order to try potentially to find social housing. So I made a complaint to Cornwall Council and said, you can't be giving that kind of advice to people. It's actually really harmful, and will put them at risk of significant further harm. And that level of information and advice hasn't really changed. So the council recognised that 5 years ago as being inappropriate and that they would make changes. But actually the advice that I've been given recently hasn't really improved or steered away from that level of inappropriate advice giving. So it's more, the advice that I'm getting from them is to put myself in a position of harm before they recognise my need in terms of vulnerability. So it's really difficult to kind of follow their pathways without feeling more vulnerable, if that makes sense. The other support, I suppose, that I have, sort of kind of, friends and contacts. But if I'm honest, it's meant really well. The messages that I'm getting are, we're sorry you're in this situation, we'll keep our eyes peeled. But I know 3 other people that are in this situation. God, isn't it awful? One of them's had to leave Cornwall. So even if people could help, there is a kind of demand, an overarching demand, that means that it's not just me looking. Yeah, so it's kind of difficult at the moment. And the other support that I have is with my healthcare teams. So getting hold of them is hard because they are under duress. The wait times have extended post-COVID. But even the consultant that I saw 2 weeks ago, he is saying, I'm really sorry that you're in this situation. And it's happening to a lot of his patients. That was what he said to me. This is happening to loads of people that I'm seeing at the moment. So even if, he was able to wave a magic wand, he has several X amount of other patients that he cares for and looks after that are in exactly the same position as me. How do I feel? Scared. I get really anxious really quickly when I'm talking to a lot of these departments, because it's almost like having to hoop jump in a way which, when you're already vulnerable, somebody asking you to hoop jump into more vulnerability is actually feels really triggering. So I'm somebody that I was, when I was initially first diagnosed, and I'm quite a tough cookie, really. I'm very independent and I'm quite highly motivated. But I suffered with PTSD and depression. So anybody with chronic pain, chronic illness, anything like that, has a much higher increased risk, over 85% of depression and mental health sort of compromise, really. And so whenever I kind of have these conversations where I'm being asked for my situation to either get more acute or closer to the deadline of eviction, I just get really anxious straight away. And I have to implement so much self-care not to kind of implode and go into a state of shock, depression, lethargy. But actually I'm having to manage my physical symptoms all the time because my immune system is really reacting to the chronic stress that I'm under anyway. So my mobility is compromised at the moment. I'm in more pain than I would be normally. I'm not sleeping very well. And it feels like I'm kind of trying to do damage limitation to stop myself going into a spiral of just real panic and into a mental health space that I truly won't be able to cope with. When I'm not managing all of that, I just feel really angry. And I feel really angry because this situation of housing in Cornwall has been like this for a really long time. For at least 5 years, I've struggled to try and find rented accommodation. For at least 3, maybe 4 of those, I've been liaising either happily or unhappily with the housing social departments to try and get housed, and getting relatively nowhere. So it's just really frustrating because a lot of this could have been acknowledged, prevented, and resolved way ahead of the COVID crisis. And if I can see that as somebody who's relatively competent, knowledgeable healthcare provider, ex-healthcare provider, then the council really could have acknowledged this. And also, I'm really good at contacting people like MPs, councillors. Every time I write an email, I will copy in my local councillor, George Eustace. I never get a reply. And I get a reply from his administrative assistant, but there's very little they can do. So a lot of the time, I'm sort of ping-ponging, especially at the moment, between feeling sad, feeling scared, and feeling frustrated. I mean, we've already spoken a little bit about this in terms of a top-down problem, a bottom-up problem, and both of those kind of either authority, council bodies, governance, and how these things could have been immediately sort of halted or assessed or even acknowledged. I mean, you know, a year ago when Cornwall did the survey of the Cornwall you want, everybody on that forum said, please address housing. So in some respects, I kind of think that it's really a duty of care for the people who have authority in terms of local governance and local service provision to really say, yes, we've got a crisis, we have got a crisis, and we recognise that and we will start to take immediate action. But also I think that there's a real sense that from the bottom up, there's a lot that people can actually do themselves to help. So we kind of know this year that there's an unprecedented level of demand for staycation and holiday here in Cornwall. Well, the first thing that can be done is people cannot Airbnb their property just yet. Wait. Rent to somebody local. Rent to a student. Rent to a dentist or somebody that works in a care home. Take one element of the privilege that you have, the resources that you have, whether it's one home or 5, and help somebody to be housed for the next 1 or 2 years. And if we can promote that sort of level of social justice and community justice and actually talk about it honestly, then we've immediately got some actions that can be implemented to help people like me that are looking at the moment. And that, in a sense, will free up the urgent departments who are looking to help the most in need and the most vulnerable and the most in crisis, the people that have the complex needs. The other thing that the council can do is actually take the welfare team who are working Monday to Wednesday and make them full-time. More bums on seats, more people doing the assessments and recognising it as a public health issue. I think the other thing that can be done is to recognise the sister groups of the housing department, so planning, and for really the planning department to start saying no an awful lot more than they do. And a way to do that is actually to sit around a table and say, how else does this housing crisis, what other decisions are people making that has an immediate impact? And that might be, it's the tourist board that comes in. It might be that planning prevent luxury projects from happening for the next 2 to 5 years, because we don't need them. We need people to have somewhere to go so that they're not homeless. And maybe pulling in speakers like Rob Hopkins, Raina Wynn, Mark, I forget his last name, that wrote the film Bait. Mark Jenkins, thank you. And having that, and including the creative people that have already got the knowledge and creating the projects that have access to resolution, either by way of promotion or by way of solution. Well, I'm hoping the council are going to buy that property over there, just quickly renovate it in the next couple of months and let me live there so I can stay in the community that I know and love. That would be great, wouldn't it? I am really hoping that I'm going to be able to find somewhere to live. That's got to be my priority, because that's the only way I'm going to stabilise my health and I'm going to stabilise my day-to-day world. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.